I want you to just take a second and imagine a single piece of art. And I don't mean like a painting hanging quietly in a museum somewhere, and definitely not your standard 3-minute pop track about a breakup.
Right, something much bigger.
Exactly. Imagine a piece of art that somehow functions simultaneously as a sworn legal brief, a highly public accusation of corruption, and, well, an inescapable piece of cultural memory. Picture a document that reaches into this heavily disputed historical event, grabs it by the collar, and just permanently overwrites how the entire public remembers it.
I mean, that is a massive, almost impossible undertaking for any piece of media, let alone, an acoustic song, to actually pull that off, to engineer a track that physically alters the legal and cultural landscape. It requires a very specific kind of architecture.
And uncovering that exact architecture is why we are here. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to completely unpack a comprehensive 10-part analytical breakdown of Bob Dylan's 1975 protest epic, Hurricane. We are going to explore exactly how this track took the incredibly messy, heavily disputed legal history of boxer Rubin Hurricane Carter and transformed it into a culturally explosive narrative.
Yeah, and more than that, we're going to see why the actual mechanics of this song serve as a literal blueprint for how today's true crime media operates.
Right, the DNA of true crime.
Exactly. But before we really get into the machinery of how this was done, I do need to introduce a critical disclaimer. Because the text we're analyzing today dives headfirst into some highly politically charged topics.
Very charged.
Yeah. Specifically, systemic racism, police profiling, and alleged prosecutorial misconduct in the 1960s and 70s. So we want to be explicitly clear with you, the listener. In this deep dive, we are impartially reporting on the analysis provided in these source texts.
We're the messengers here.
Right. We are not endorsing any specific political viewpoints. We are absolutely not taking sides, and we aren't making independent determinations about, actual guilt or innocence in the historical Rubin Carter case. Our goal is strictly to convey the structural, musical, and thematic ideas that the analytical text lays out.
Basically, we are looking at the blueprints of the argument, not ruling on the final verdict. So, just to set the stage for you, the song Hurricane is an 8.5-minute cinematic epic. It was released on Dylan's album Desire. And unlike a lot of the vague, symbolic protest music from that era where singers just sort of talk about injustice in the abstract, this song explicitly names names.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't hold back.
Not at all. It frames Rubin Carter as a man actively and intentionally trapped by a corrupted legal process.
It doesn't just suggest the world is unfair.
Uh-huh.
It stages literal scenes. It points specific fingers at specific people, and it relentlessly pushes the listener toward one definitive moral verdict. I mean, it is advocacy art in its absolute purest form.
Which, of course, begs the question, how do you even begin to build a song that does all of that? Because there is this pervasive myth in pop culture, right? The solitary genius. We love the image of Bob Dylan sitting alone in a dimly lit room with an acoustic guitar, just downloading sheer brilliance directly from the universe.
Right, the lone poet narrative.
Exactly. But this analysis completely shatters that idea. This song was a deliberate, strategic collaboration with a man named Jacques Levy.
And what's really fascinating here is what Levy actually brought to the table. He wasn't just another folk musician trading guitar chords in Greenwich Village. He had a deep theatrical and dramaturgical background. He was literally a stage director.
Oh, wow, a stage director.
And when you look at the song through the lens of a stage play, you suddenly realize why the lyrics don't read like typical elusive, poetic Bob Dylan verses. They read like a highly compressed dramatic script.
Okay, let's unpack this because this feels incredibly relevant to how we consume media right now. When I look at the structure of Hurricane, it reminds me so much of the ultra-tight editing you see in modern true crime podcasts.
Oh, for sure.
Or even like those viral TikTok explainers that break down a massive scandal in 60 seconds. The sheer pace of the story is so relentless that it practically dictates your belief. You don't have time to pause and doubt the narrator because you are already sprinting to the next shocking scene.
That is a perfect analogy. The pacing itself operates as an argument. I mean, think about how the song actually starts. It doesn't give you a slow, reflective introduction about Rubin Carter's childhood or his hopes and dreams.
No, it drops you right in.
It opens mid-crisis. Pistol shots ring out in the barroom night. You get the cinematic staging immediately. A barroom, a witness, blood on the floor, the frantic police response. The song cuts rapidly between these vivid scenes, shifting voices and settings without giving you a single moment to breathe.
It's just pure, unadulterated momentum. But how does that momentum actually convince you of a legal argument. I mean, speed is great for an action movie, but for a legal case.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that momentum is deliberately designed to mirror the institutional momentum of the criminal justice system itself.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. The song's rapid pacing gives you this overwhelming feeling of inevitability. It shows you that once the machine of accusation starts rolling, once the police identify Carter as a suspect, stopping that machine or correcting an error becomes virtually impossible. The listener actually feels the steamroller effect of the legal system through the speed of the lyrics.
That makes total sense. And there's a concept in the breakdown that I found incredibly sharp. It's the idea that the song uses, quote, asymmetrical information.
Yes, asymmetrical information, such a key point.
Which, as I understand it, basically means it feeds you exactly what you need to follow the accusation, but it deliberately withholds anything that might destabilize that specific narrative. The song is, as the analysis calls it, optimized for legibility.
Wait, actually, let's pause on that phrase. Legibility. Does that basically mean the song just dumbs down the messy reality of the historical case so we know exactly who the good guys and bad guys are?
Well, it's less about dumbing down and more about aggressively streamlining. Real court cases are incredibly chaotic. Witnesses contradict themselves, timelines don't perfectly align, people act irrationally under stress.
Right, real life is messy.
Exactly. And if you include all that friction, the story becomes hard to follow. It becomes illegible to a mass audience. By stripping away those contradictions, Dylan and Levy create what the text calls a reality effect. It feels like a rigorous documentary because it gives you concrete sensory details and procedural steps, but it's constantly subtly cueing you on how to judge those events. It essentially hands you the evidence and the verdict at the exact same time. Okay, so Levy and Dylan draft this incredibly tight, relentless, streamlined script. But, reading a script on a piece of paper doesn't make your heart race. How did Dylan physically force the listener to feel that panic? Because you can have the best script in the world, but if the delivery is flat, nobody cares.
And this is where we get into the song's sonic rhetoric. The music in Hurricane is not just a decorative background for the lyrics. The sound itself is the argument.
Wait, music as an argument? I mean, I get that it sets a mood, but it's just a backing track, isn't it? How does a violin actually argue a legal point?
Well, think about what the violin is actually doing on this track. It's not playing some sweet, sweeping romantic melody. It's restless, it's circling, it swoops in and out of the vocal lines completely unpredictably.
It's almost grating at times.
Yes. That creates total instability. Instead of soothing you, the violin physically creates a sense of tension, of being pursued, of pure anxiety. It mimics the psychological state of being hunted by an unfair system. And underneath that, you have the rhythm section, the bass and the drums, which is entirely propulsive. It makes stasis impossible. You are forced forward whether you want to go or not.
And Dylan's vocal delivery on this track is absolutely wild. He isn't crooning. He is rushing. He's incredibly direct. He sounds almost breathless.
Yeah, breathless is the perfect word for it.
It sounds like a man who broke into a radio station and is trying to get the entire story onto the official record before the cops kick the door down and his time runs out. And then he uses those repetitive refrains as these massive emotional anchors.
Those refrains are absolutely crucial. A protest song, if it wants to be a real cultural force, has to be recallable. It has to be quotable.
You have to be able to sing it at a march.
Exactly. By returning over and over to the title phrase and returning to the tragedy of Carter's lost athletic destiny, the fact that he could have been the champion of the world, the song ensures you never lose sight of the human being at the center of this massive institutional critique.
But I have to push back here for a second. When you create this incredibly thrilling, propulsive musical surface, don't you risk aestheticizing real human suffering? I mean, we are talking about a man's actual legal nightmare here. A real historical double murder case with real victims and a man facing life in prison.
That's a very fair point.
Aren't we just turning a horrible tragedy into an adrenaline-pumping piece of entertainment for people to, tap their feet to in the car?
It raises a really important ethical question, and honestly, it's a danger in all politically charged art. Are we exploiting trauma for a catchy hook? But the analysis provides a really strong balancing view on this. It argues that without this effective charge, without that adrenaline, and that catchy hook, audiences might never engage with the complex details of the case in the first place.
They just tune it out.
Right. The emotional, thrilling form isn't a betrayal of the seriousness. It's the required vehicle for it. The sonic excitement serves as structured urgency. It grabs you by the shoulders and prepares your mind to absorb a really dense, complicated narrative.
It essentially tricks you. It makes you care enough to actually sit through an 8-minute lecture on 1960s legal procedure.
Precisely. And that urgent, relentless sound was designed to mirror a very specific machine. Which brings us to the actual target of the song. Hurricane isn't just saying, a bureaucratic mistake was made. It is putting the entire legal system on trial.
And doing so by making a very specific claim about how that system operates. The breakdown highlights that the song frames structural racism not just as a background detail, but as the actual operational logic of the justice system. It generates the motive for the police.
Yes, the song explicitly argues that Carter is investigated primarily because his body is, quote, narratively available as a suspect.
Narratively available, that is a haunting phrase. Break that down for me.
It means the police in the song aren't looking for a suspect who matches the exact factual evidence. They're looking for someone who fits a pre-written cultural narrative of guilt.
Right.
Because Carter is a black man in the vicinity, the systemic logic doesn't need his clothes or his car to match the eyewitness descriptions perfectly. His racial identity makes his body available to fill in the blank on the arrest warrant. Furthermore, the song portrays the courtroom itself not as a neutral, solemn venue for finding objective truth, but as a staged theater. It presents a hierarchy where credibility is assigned almost entirely based on race and class rather than facts.
So what does this all mean? Why does this matter for you, the listener sitting here today?
Well, the text argues that this song is fundamentally training you in media literacy. It is teaching you how to look at a seemingly neutral, formal legal procedure, a courtroom with a judge, a jury, sworn oaths, transcripts, and spot the deeply embedded biases that are hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
It's showing you that a legal process can look completely formal and by the book and still be profoundly, structurally unequal. And this places Hurricane in a very specific, fascinating lineage within Bob Dylan's own catalog. If you look at his earlier protest work, like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, you see a similar stark moral anger at unequal justice. But Hurricane is much more aggressive. It's cinematic.
And then there's his song Joey, which came out on the exact same album as Hurricane. Joey controversially humanized a notorious mobster, Joey Gallo.
Yeah, comparing those two tracks is really revealing. Both songs show Dylan's enduring fascination with outlaw figures and his obsession with how public narratives simplify and condemn human lives. But while Joey plays heavily with moral ambiguity, asking you to sympathize with a known criminal, Hurricane relies entirely on the emotional engine of absolute unquestionable innocence.
There's no gray area.
None. It's a much more morally certain intervention. The entire structure of Hurricane completely collapses if you think Rubin Carter might be even a little bit guilty.
Which brings us to the sharpest and honestly the most uncomfortable edge of this whole deep dive. If this song is a streamlined stage play that simplifies human lives to make a powerful point, what happens to the real historical people who were forced to play the villains? Because to make the song so aerodynamically perfect, to make it that legible script we talked about earlier, Dylan and Levy had to compress a lot of history.
A lot of history.
They had to minimize or completely omit any friction that slowed down the story.
The analysis calls this the ethics of compression. In protest art, there is always a severe trade-off between explanatory sharpness and historical completeness. You narrow the causal attention to highlight the injustice. You focus a giant spotlight on the corrupt cops. But in doing so, you inevitably leave out complicating facts, shifting witness testimonies, and the messy, confusing reality of the actual night.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In a podcast or a broad protest song, it's one thing to streamline a timeline. But Dylan names real, living people in an 8-minute pop song. He calls out witnesses by their full names. He sings lines like, Arthur Dexter Bradley's just a hobo, and Alfred Bello had a partner and he had a rap for the cops.
Yeah, he really went there.
Aren't you risking severe reputational harm there? Is it actually ethical to take real, flawed human beings who are involved in a chaotic event and permanently freeze them in the role of cartoonish villains forever, just to create a clean narrative for your audience?
It is a massive ethical risk, and the text doesn't shy away from that reality at all. The song essentially enacts what the analysis calls a memory capture. Because songs are inherently sticky, they use rhyme, rhythm, and melody to condense complex events into highly memorable phrases.
They get stuck in your head.
Right. And once those catchy phrases attach to a real person's name, they can easily outlast thousands of pages of court documents, historical archives, and official corrections. Arthur Dexter Bradley and Alfred Bello, the people named negatively in the song, faced a durable, global cultural representation of themselves that they had absolutely no control over. The song literally became their permanent public identity.
It's the double-edged sword of celebrity advocacy. A song comes out, it goes platinum, and suddenly millions of people think they are legal experts on your life. And the breakdown talks about this fascinating concept, the movement ecology surrounding the song. It wasn't just a record release, it was a mobilized campaign. Dylan used the sheer gravity of his fame to convert dusty legal files into mainstream issue salience. He threw the rolling Thunder Revue benefit concerts. He created these massive media spectacles.
But there is a profound tension in that movement ecology. Celebrity narratives often end up inherently recentering the famous helper rather than the actual victim. The media coverage starts to focus on Bob Dylan visiting the prison rather than the intricate legal nightmare Rubin Carter is actually enduring.
Dylan becomes the main character.
Exactly. Dylan becomes the story. And the analysis warns that listeners and the public at large often confuse public visibility with actual justice.
Because the harsh reality is, the song Hurricane didn't technically free Rubin Carter. The song didn't walk into a courtroom and file a complex legal appeal. It was the slow, grinding, incredibly unglamorous work of defense lawyers and courts over many, many years that eventually overturned his conviction in the 1980s, long after the song had dropped off the pop charts.
That's right. The song's role was catalytic, not conclusive. It created the legitimacy climate.
The legitimacy climate, meaning it made it culturally acceptable or even fashionable to question the official police narrative.
Yes, exactly. It generated the public pressure and the financial resources that allowed the lawyers to do their actual jobs. It proves that massive institutions often respond to cultural heat, not just to newly discovered evidence. But we have to be incredibly careful not to let the triumphant myth of the pop song completely erase the actual tedious labor of legal reform. Art can pick the lock, but the lawyers have to push the heavy door open.
So bringing this all together, why does any of this matter to you today? Why spend time dissecting the structural mechanics of a song from 1975? Well, because Hurricane is a vital, living tool for your own media literacy. Think about how much true crime media we consume on a daily basis right now. Whether you are listening to a 10-part investigative podcast, binging a slickly produced Netflix documentary, or just swiping through viral social media posts demanding justice for a wrongful conviction, this song teaches you exactly how to look for the advocacy frame.
It trains you to step back from the adrenaline of the story and ask the hard, structural questions. What messy historical facts have been compressed or omitted to make this story flow better? Who has been named and permanently cast as the legible villain? And how is the pacing, the editing, and the background music actively manipulating your own moral compass?
It's incredible to think about. We've gone from the acoustic mechanics of a single folk song to dissecting the entire ecosystem of how we process truth, bias, and justice in modern media. But as we wrap up, I know you have one final thought on this idea of memory capture that you wanted to leave us with.
I do. And it's something I really hope you'll mull over long after you finish listening today. We've established that Dylan and Levy used an 8.5-minute, brilliantly crafted song to permanently overwrite the complex historical archive of a 1960s legal case. They captured the cultural memory of that event using vinyl records and radio play. So this raises a terrifying but important question. What is happening to our cultural memory right now? We live in an era where massive justice campaigns, complex geopolitical conflicts, and historical narratives are being fought through 30-second algorithm-optimized videos. If a brilliantly constructed song from 1975 could overwrite history with nothing but acoustic guitars and a restless violin, what are these hyper-compressed, emotionally weaponized digital formats doing to the truth of our era's legal battles? Will future generations remember the nuanced, messy reality of our institutions? Or will history belong entirely to whoever have the best rhythm, the sharpest jump cuts, and the most compelling, artificially simplified script?
Picture a document that acts as a legal brief, a public accusation, and an inescapable cultural memory. What happens when that document is a 30-second video on your phone? It's a wild, sobering thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those hard questions, stay insanely curious, and always, always look for the frame around the narratives you consume. We'll see you next time.